Have you ever wondered why the more you want something, the more it feels like it slips from your grasp? Why the more you think, the more carefully you calculate, the harder you try to control every possibility, the more exhausted and uneasy you become? Perhaps you believe you haven't tried hard enough, haven't been disciplined enough, or haven't been strong enough. But what if the truth is that you are trying too hard? We are taught that to get what we want, we must tense ourselves, keep pushing ourselves, and keep everything under control. Yet Carl Jung saw the human being in a different light. He believed that the greatest deadlocks in life cannot be resolved through force or rigid effort. They can only be surpassed when something within you changes. In other words, it is not that you lack action, it is that you are acting from a place that is too anxious. When you live in tension, the unconscious receives a very clear message. This world is not safe. And the task of the unconscious is not to bring you everything you want, it is to protect you from risk. So no matter how hard you try, there is still an invisible force inside that slows you down. You still chase the goal, but you chase it in fear. You still talk about manifesting, but underneath is a lack of trust in the flow of life. So what happens when you relax? It is not giving up or surrendering, it is that you stop fighting yourself. This video is not about miracles or quick formulas. It speaks to a Jungian truth. When you relax, you begin to manifest what you want, not through strain, but through inner harmony. If you have tried so hard and still feel stuck, stay here. Perhaps what you are seeking will arrive when you are quiet enough to allow it to appear. Number 1. Why does the more you relax, the easier it becomes to get what you want? There is a familiar experience almost everyone has had, yet rarely do we pause to understand it fully. It is the moment you have done everything you can, considered every possibility, tightened yourself to the point where there is nothing left to tighten, and then you let go. Not letting go of the goal, but letting go of the inner rigidity. And at that very moment, what you have been pursuing seems to begin moving. Not immediately, not in the way you planned, but something shifts. Jung believed that moments like these reveal the deepest mechanism of human psychological life. We often believe that getting what we want is an equation of effort. The more effort, the greater the chance of success. But Jung did not see the human being as a linear machine, where the amount of work you put in determines the amount of result you get out. He saw the human being as a complex field of psychic energy, where your inner state determines the direction in which all action flows. And when that state is governed by tension, fear, and control, energy does not flow toward creativity and expansion. It is held back in defense. Tension is not only a feeling of fatigue, it is a silent message you send into the unconscious every day. I am not safe. I must brace myself to survive. When that message repeats long enough, the unconscious organizes your entire life around avoiding risk. And the irony is that many things you desire, no matter how beautiful they are, contain an element of risk in the eyes of the unconscious. Success means being seen. Love means the possibility of loss. Freedom means losing control. When you are tense, the unconscious does not distinguish good from bad. It distinguishes only safe and dangerous. This is why so many people try harder and feel more stuck. Not because they are not capable enough, but because the state they carry in every step is a state of bracing. Jung believed that in such cases, a person is not truly acting from their center, but from a part that is constantly afraid of being threatened. And when you act from fear, even the right decisions carry a distorted energy. I have a friend named Sarah, and her story is a very typical example. Sarah is capable, purposeful, and deeply serious about her life. She does not wait for luck. She believes in discipline and preparation. For years, Sarah pursued a very clear career goal. She worked beyond what was required, learned additional skills, and always set high standards for herself. But the closer she got, the more tense she became. She overthought every decision, tried to control every detail, and feared mistakes so much that she no longer dared to be flexible. As a result, important opportunities kept arriving and passing. Not because Sarah made some major mistake, but because she was always braced. In critical meetings, she spoke too much because she feared being judged. In moments that required decisiveness, she hesitated because she feared choosing wrong. Everything was subtle, very small, but enough to keep doors from opening. From the outside, people might say she lacked luck or lacked charm. But from Jung's perspective, it was a completely reasonable response of the unconscious to an inner state that did not feel safe. Only when Sarah became exhausted and was forced to slow down did things change. Not because she abandoned the goal, but because she no longer had the strength to keep bracing and controlling. She began to work at a different rhythm, still serious, but lighter, still responsible, but no longer carrying the fear of having to prove herself. She no longer placed her entire self-worth on each small outcome. And precisely in that period, the opportunity she had pursued for so long appeared. Not as a reward for effort, but as a natural consequence of her no longer blocking herself. In the middle of these observations, Jung has a very short line that is enough to summarize the whole mechanism at work. What you resist persists. When you resist life's uncertainty with tension, you feed the very thing you fear. When you try to control every possibility, you affirm that the world is not trustworthy. And the unconscious, loyal to its task of protection, will continue to create circumstances that force you to tense up even more so you can prepare. Relaxation, therefore, is not a passive attitude. It is a profound psychological shift. Relaxation is when you stop treating life as a threat that must be controlled. It is when you accept that you cannot predict everything, but you still trust that you can face what happens. When that trust appears, psychic energy is no longer consumed by defense. It becomes available for intuition, for sensitivity, for the ability to recognize when to move forward and when to pause. To picture this more clearly, think of holding a handful of sand. When you clench your fist, the sand slips through your fingers. The harder you squeeze, the more you lose. But when you open your hand, the sand rests. You do not keep it by force, you keep it by allowing it. What you desire in life is the same. When you try to hold it with tension, you create pressure that makes it slide away. When you relax, you do not abandon the goal. You create space for it to remain. Manifestation, from Jung's perspective, is not pulling something from the outside toward you by sheer will. It is the result of inner alignment. When the conscious mind and the unconscious are no longer in harsh conflict, you begin to act differently. Not more, but more accurately. Not hurriedly, but at the right time. You do not need to calculate every possibility. You can feel the rhythm of the situation. And it is in these states that what people call luck often appears. This explains why some people seem to achieve a great deal without looking like they are trying excessively. Not because they do less, but because they do not carry fear in every action. They do not turn life into a chain of constant tests. They allow themselves to be fully present, and from that presence, action becomes natural and powerful. Relaxation does not create what you want. It removes what is preventing you from getting it. It dismantles the invisible resistance between you and life. And many people looking back recognize the same moment. It was not when they pushed harder, but when they stopped bracing, that everything began to open. If you have ever experienced such a moment, where simply softening a little allowed the path to appear naturally, you can share what it felt like in the comments. Sometimes, recognizing and naming that moment is already the first step of a shift. Number 2, tension is the reason manifesting does not work. And as you begin to understand that relaxation is not weakness, but a mature inner state, you will also touch the next truth, deeper and harder to accept. It is tension itself that quietly destroys your attempts to manifest, even when you do every step correctly. Many people say they have tried manifesting. They visualize, they affirm, they write goals, they believe they want it strongly enough. But deep inside, they are still tense. And Jung would say that state is why nothing moves. Not because you are thinking wrong, but because you are thinking from a place that is too afraid. In Jungian psychology, manifesting does not operate at the level of conscious wanting. It operates at the level of the underlying psychological state. And tension is the worst baseline state for creating anything new. Tension is not merely worry or temporary pressure. It is a psychological structure. When tension lasts, your whole inner system shifts into survival mode. The brain prioritizes detecting risk over recognizing possibility. The body holds energy for defense rather than for creativity. In that state, you no longer live to expand your life, you live to avoid mistakes. And in survival mode, anything new is treated as dangerous. Jung believed the unconscious always prioritizes safety over development. So when you try to manifest something while tense, the unconscious does not hear a dream. It hears one clear signal. There is a threat. Jung said, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good." And this shows the unconscious is not against you. It does not sabotage your life randomly. It responds faithfully to the state you live in every day. When you are tense, the signal you send down is that the world is unsafe, mistakes are not allowed, and change is risky. The unconscious, doing its protective job, activates invisible forces that keep you in the familiar zone, even if that zone makes you stuck. When you relax, that same resource begins to change direction. It no longer restrains, it supports. It no longer confronts, it guides. What changes is not the unconscious, but how you are present with yourself. To understand this mechanism more clearly, look at the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus is allowed to bring back the one he loves from the underworld with only one condition. He must not turn back to look until they have both left hell. That condition does not require more strength, more effort, or more action. It demands one thing that is extraordinarily difficult for human beings: to hold steady faith in darkness and uncertainty. When he is close to the light, Orpheus cannot bear the tension and doubt. He turns back. and Eurydice disappears forever. From a Jungian perspective, this is not only a love tragedy, it is a profound psychological allegory. Orpheus fails not because he does not love enough, but because his ego cannot tolerate not knowing. Tension makes him break the flow that is forming within the unconscious. That moment of doubt cuts the connection between consciousness and the deeper process unfolding beyond control. The new, Jung would say, cannot be born under a constant spotlight of inspection. It needs darkness, quiet, time. Manifesting operates by the same principle. When you are tense, you are always turning back to look. You check the results. You measure progress. You ask, why hasn't it arrived? Am I doing it right? Did I mess something up? On the surface, this looks like responsibility and clarity. But at a deeper level, it is a form of doubt. And that repeated doubt disrupts what is forming in the unconscious. Jung would say the new needs a quiet space to be born. Tension is what breaks that space. From a psychological viewpoint, tension does something dangerous. It narrows perception. When you are tense, you only see what is missing. You only see what has not been achieved. You only see the distance between the present and what you desire. In that state, you cannot notice subtle signals, slightly offbeat opportunities, or alternative paths the unconscious is trying to suggest. It is not that manifesting doesn't work. You simply cannot see it because your entire perceptual system is locked in fear. Jung called this the domination of the fearful ego. When the ego feels threatened, it wants to control everything. But the paradox is, the more it controls, the more it isolates itself. Connection with the unconscious is cut, and you are left with rigid willpower. That willpower can help you endure, but it is not enough to create deep transformation. Manifesting, properly understood through Jung, is a dialogue between consciousness and the unconscious. Tension turns that dialogue into a monologue. You speak endlessly, but you no longer listen. Imagine you are trying to call a friend in a room filled with noise. The louder you speak, the more energy you lose, and still the message does not get through. Not because the other person cannot hear, but because the environment is too loud. Tension is that noise. It does not make you less strong. It makes you unheard at a deeper level. The unconscious does not respond to intensity. It responds to clarity and stillness. Tension also creates another paradox. It makes you act from lack. And any action that comes from lack reinforces lack. You seek money while fearing losing money. You seek love while fearing loneliness. You seek success while fearing failure. The unconscious does not judge this. It simply reflects the dominant state honestly. Not because life is strict, but because the human psyche operates by feedback. And here is the key point of this section. Jung was very clear that you cannot create abundance from a state of unsafety. Not because you are unworthy, but because these two states are incompatible. Like trying to plant a seed in soil that has been compressed. The soil is not bad. It simply needs loosening, softening. Relaxation, in a Jungian spirit, is that softening process. Not letting go of the goal, but letting go of the inner battle with yourself. To practice this, you do not need to force yourself to not be tense or add more manifesting effort. What matters is knowing when to stop at the right time. When you notice yourself becoming impatient or pushing everything, return to your body, breathe more slowly, and soften the places that are bracing. Stay still long enough for something inside to recognize that there is no danger right now. No need to visualize or affirm anything else. When the inner confrontation settles, you no longer need to manifest because you have stopped blocking the flow that has always been present. Number 3. The unconscious does not respond when you live in fear. If tension is what makes the inner flow noisy, what happens when your baseline state is not only tension, but prolonged fear? In Jung's view, fear is not a passing emotion, nor a weakness to be corrected. It is a posture of living. When fear becomes the baseline, a person no longer merely reacts to individual situations. They begin to see all of life through the lens of threat. Every choice is weighed by the possibility of loss. Every change carries the feeling that one must be on guard. And when the psyche is organized this way for long enough, the unconscious, the deepest and most sensitive layer of the human structure, gradually stops responding in the direction of opening. This often confuses people. Many say they can no longer hear their intuition, no longer feel what is right, no longer see a clear direction. But Jung would not call that disconnection. He would see it as the intentional silence of the unconscious. When the inner environment is covered in fear, the unconscious does not disappear. It steps back, like an intelligent part of the system that knows this is not yet the time to open more doors. The unconscious does not exist to satisfy the ego's wishes, but to protect the integrity of psychological life. When a person lives in prolonged fear, every signal from the unconscious, whether intuition, images, or impulses, risks being interpreted as a threat. Under those conditions, silence becomes the safest choice. You can see this clearly in everyday situations. Someone stands before a major change, leaving a job that is familiar but no longer nourishing, ending a relationship that has lost its vitality, or stepping into a new path they have thought about for a long time. On the surface, they think a lot. They analyze, weigh options, ask for advice, and make plans. But each time they get close to a decision, the body reacts before the mind does. The chest grows heavy. The breath shortens. The worst-case scenarios appear clearer and more detailed than any positive possibility. And then they tell themselves, "Not yet. It's not clear enough. I need more time." From a Jungian perspective, what is happening is not a lack of information or a lack of thinking. What is happening is that the whole inner system is in an alert state. When fear is the ground, the unconscious cannot guide. Not because it does not know the way, but because every way is felt as a risk. In that state, the protective function overwhelms the guiding function. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Placed in the context of prolonged fear, another layer becomes clear. When fear operates quietly at the baseline and is not recognized, the unconscious still orchestrates your life, but in a way that keeps you where you are or returns you to familiar patterns. And you call that circumstance, fate. The timing isn't ripe. Fear makes the unconscious stop responding, not because the unconscious is weak or incapable, but because it is too loyal to protection. Jung saw the unconscious as an extremely sensitive system, always reading signals from the body, emotions, and the overall psychological atmosphere. When you repeatedly send the message that change is dangerous, that mistakes are unbearable, that losing control equals collapse, the unconscious closes the doors that lead to the new. not because it does not know the road, but because it will not allow you to walk it in that state. You can imagine the unconscious as a navigation system in thick fog. When the sky is clear, it can project far ahead, suggesting many flexible routes. But when fog covers everything, it automatically narrows its beam. Not because it stops working, but because guiding far in those conditions is dangerous. Fear is that fog. It does not destroy your capacity for direction, but it forces the system to reduce its signal. This is why the more a person lives in fear, the more they feel, "I don't know what I want." In truth, desire does not vanish. It is simply no longer allowed to appear. Because if desire rises in a psychological environment full of threat, it will immediately be turned into pressure, panic, or self-blame. The unconscious understands this, and it chooses silence so the system does not harm itself. Fear also creates another subtle paradox. The more you demand certainty, the less the unconscious responds. Because the unconscious does not operate by the logic of "know for sure, then move." It operates in movement, in small signals, in steps that cannot be guaranteed in advance. When you require absolute safety before changing, you set a condition life cannot fulfill, and the unconscious, rather than opposing you, withdraws. In the Jungian language, fear is tied to the defensive ego. This ego is not bad. It is trying to keep you safe. But when it holds the entire steering wheel, the deeper layers of the psyche, where intuition, creativity, and guidance live, step back. Manifesting, understood through Jung, cannot happen while the ego is driving in panic. It can only appear when the ego is calm enough to yield to a wider center, where a person no longer lives only to avoid mistakes, but to respond to life. Jung never demanded that human beings eliminate fear. He understood that fear is a natural part of being human. The difference lies in whether fear is being listened to or being given authority. When fear becomes the final decision maker, the unconscious chooses silence. When fear is seen as a signal but no longer holds the center, the psychological atmosphere begins to change. And when that atmosphere changes, the unconscious begins to respond again, very softly, not with dramatic signs, but with subtle movements, a lighter feeling in the body when you think of one direction, a sense of expansion when you imagine one choice, an impulse that no longer comes with panic. These signals do not appear to force you forward, but to remind you that life is still there inside, that you still have the capacity to answer life. Number 4. If you want to attain something, you must first stop forcing yourself. In the moment you begin to realize the unconscious is not silent because you did not try hard enough, but because you have lived too long in fear, another perspective starts to open. When forcing yourself forward is no longer the right path, you begin to sense that what is truly needed now is not more pushing, but a different kind of guidance, more subtle, coming from inner harmony rather than coercion. We grow up in a system that glorifies forcing. Force yourself to try harder. Force yourself to be more disciplined. Force yourself to be stronger. It seems every achievement must come with some degree of rigidity. But Jung viewed psychological development in a completely different way. He did not believe inner maturity comes from constantly pushing yourself beyond your limits of endurance. It comes from understanding the true rhythm of the human psyche. And within that rhythm, coercion does not create transformation. It creates resistance. Many people confuse effort with forcing, Effort comes from life within, and forcing comes from the fear of not being enough. When you force yourself, you tell the unconscious that who you are right now is not okay, and the unconscious responds by tightening. Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." But you cannot choose to become something else while you are denying yourself. I once witnessed the story of a woman I met in a meditation retreat. She came with a very clear goal. I want to heal. I want peace. I want to change my life. But from the first days, she was almost exhausted. She tried to meditate for a very long time, tried to keep her mind empty, tried not to think. Whenever her mind wandered, she blamed herself. Whenever emotion rose, she tried to press it down. On the surface, she did every exercise correctly. But inside, her body grew tenser, her breath more hurried, and her sense of failure heavier. Only when an instructor told her, "You don't need to be good at meditating, you only need to stop forcing yourself to meditate correctly," did things begin to change. She did not gain anything immediately. But something subtle happened. Her body softened, her breath slowed, tears appeared without a reason. Not because she forced healing, but because she stopped fighting herself. And from that point, real movement began. From a scientific angle, this is fully grounded. When you keep forcing yourself, the sympathetic nervous system stays activated. The body remains in must do, must achieve, must be right. In that state, the brain prioritizes survival over learning and restructuring. By contrast, when pressure decreases, the parasympathetic system activates, allowing the body to recover, process emotion, and integrate experience. In other words, coercion spends energy on surviving. Releasing coercion allows that energy to be used for transformation. Jung saw this not only biologically, but symbolically. He believed that when people try to become an ideal image through force, they move farther from the self, the deepest coordinating center of psychological life. Real development does not happen when you strive to become a better version. It happens when you are safe enough to be the person who is present. And only in that state can the unconscious cooperate, rather than resist. Forcing yourself also creates a familiar paradox. The more you force yourself, the more you feel you are not enough. The more you try to reach, the more you feel you are falling behind. Not because you are inadequate, but because coercion places you inside an inner war. One part wants to move forward, another part fears it cannot bear it. And in that war, energy is consumed not by action, but by conflict. Jung would say any growth that happens inside prolonged conflict is not sustainable because it is not supported by the whole psyche. To attain something, therefore, does not begin by adding pressure. It begins by removing pressure. Not letting go of the goal, but letting go of how you treat yourself on the way to it. When you stop forcing, a different space appears. In that space, you do not need to prove, compare, or compete. And within that space, intuition begins to work, perception becomes clearer, and action becomes more natural. Jung did not promote passivity. He did not say you should sit still and wait. What he emphasized was the difference between action born from fear and action born from inner harmony. When you force yourself, action carries tension. When you stop forcing, action carries precision. Less, but truer. Slower, but more enduring. At a deeper level, stopping the force is also an act of trust. Trusting you do not need to be violent with yourself to deserve the good. trusting life does not need to be coerced to move, and this trust is not vague. It is a specific physiological and psychological state in which the body is no longer in survival mode. And when that state appears, you will notice something very Jungian. Many things do not come because you pull them toward you. They come because you stop pushing yourself away from them. You do not have to become someone else. You only have to stop fighting who you are. The practical application of this part is not about doing less or more. It is about noticing where you are forcing yourself. Maybe forcing yourself to move faster than your rhythm, forcing yourself to be peaceful before you are ready, forcing yourself to be strong when your body is tired. Simply recognizing that moment of coercion and allowing yourself to pause for one beat already begins to change the inner operating direction. No need to fix it immediately. No need to get results immediately. Just stop adding more pressure. If this section touched you, leave a comment with the phrase, "Pause to move forward." Not to say it to others, but to remind yourself that you do not have to force yourself more to deserve the good. Sometimes, the moment you allow yourself to slow down, soften, and oppose yourself less, is when life begins to move in the most natural and precise way. Number 5. When the conscious mind longs, but the unconscious resists. Right here, when you have stopped bracing and slowed down enough to feel, a familiar yet hard-to-name state becomes clear. You know what you want. Not a vague desire, but a specific direction you have thought through many times. Your conscious mind believes it is right, an opportunity to seize. Yet each time you approach it, you feel yourself shrink back. Not because you changed your mind, but because inside there is a very light yet persistent force pulling you backward. Many people live in this state without realizing it. On the surface, they still talk about goals, dreams, and plans, but inside they hesitate, procrastinate, lose energy at the very moments that matter. Then they conclude they lack determination, discipline, or strength. Jung would call that a common misunderstanding. The issue is not willpower. It is that the conscious and the unconscious are not on the same side. The conscious longs because it sees the future. It paints an image of what could be achieved and believes that if it tries hard enough, everything will change. But the unconscious does not live in the future. It lives in what has been, in memory, in the body's recorded sense of safety or unsafety. When a conscious desire touches a sensitive unconscious region, the unconscious does not argue. It quietly resists. This resistance is not loud. It does not say, "Don't." It shows up in everyday ways. You procrastinate on something important, even though you know it is necessary. You feel tired the moment you are about to cross a new threshold. You doubt yourself, even though you were confident before. You create reasonable reasons to stop, and everything looks like unfavorable circumstances. But inside, some parts are not ready. Jung believed the unconscious never opposes you without reason. It responds to what it senses as danger. Danger here is not necessarily failure. Sometimes success itself is a threat. Being seen, being recognized, stepping into a new level can mean leaving the familiar, carrying greater responsibility, and facing the fear of being judged. If the unconscious does not feel you are safe enough to hold those consequences, it pulls the brake. A clear example can be seen in the story of Marie Curie, the first and, to this day, the only woman to receive 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields. Her conscious mind always longed to discover, She was powerfully drawn to science, to questions about the nature of matter and life. But that path was not easy. Marie Curie faced poverty, sexism, and isolation within the male-dominated scientific world of her time. For years, she worked in extremely harsh conditions, researching while doubting herself. There were periods when she slowed down, not because she lacked ability, but because the psychological burden was too heavy. As a woman in a conservative scientific world, stepping into the light meant becoming a target of scrutiny. From a Jungian perspective, her unconscious carried the fear of exclusion and injury, while consciousness still longed to go farther. Only when Marie Curie fully accepted her path, no longer trying to prove herself by other people's standards, did the inner conflict soften. She no longer researched to be recognized, but because she could not live otherwise. And in that state, revolutionary contributions emerged. This was not the moment consciousness defeated the unconscious. It was the moment the two began to move in the same direction. Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." When the conscious mind longs and the unconscious resists, many people avoid that conflict by forcing harder or by quitting entirely. But both are ways of avoiding the fearful part within. And when that part is not listened to, it will keep pulling you back, no matter how hard you try. You can imagine the relationship between consciousness and the unconscious, like swimming against a current. You use a lot of strength, you get tired quickly, and you wonder why you cannot go far. Not because you are a bad swimmer, but because you have not seen the current. The unconscious is that water. It is not against your swimming. It simply shows that your direction needs adjustment. When the conscious and unconscious do not agree, your energy is split. One part wants to move forward, another part wants to hold back. And the prolonged exhaustion does not come from doing too much. It comes from constantly pulling yourself in two opposite directions. Jung believed there is no sustainable development built on prolonged inner conflict. What is subtle is that the unconscious does not demand you understand everything immediately. It only needs to be acknowledged. When you stop treating resistance as an enemy, it becomes a signal. Instead of blaming yourself, "Why am I like this?" you become curious. What in me is worried? This curiosity is not judgmental, it is listening. And in that space, the conflict starts to soften. As the two layers synchronize, your desire changes in quality. It no longer carries tension or coercion. Action no longer comes from the need to prove. You do not have to push yourself faster, yet you are no longer invisibly pulled backwards. Energy begins to flow in one direction, and what used to be difficult becomes possible in a more natural way. The practice in this phase is not about forcing yourself to understand the unconscious. It is about changing how you approach resistance. Each time you notice you want something strongly, but then procrastinate or lose energy, pause for one beat and ask gently, which part of me does not feel safe with this? No need for an answer right away. No need to analyze deeply. Just let the question exist as an invitation. Then, notice the body. Where does the resistance show up? In the chest, the belly, the shoulders? Naming the specific sensation helps the unconscious recognize you are listening, not forcing. When listened to long enough, resistance often changes shape. It does not vanish immediately, but it no longer needs to fight. And when you do this enough times, Your desire is no longer an order you must execute. It becomes a direction supported from within. Consciousness and the unconscious begin to move in the same rhythm. And it is in that state that what you long for can enter your life more sustainably and more fully. Number 6. Relaxation helps psychic energy stop sabotaging itself. Have you noticed that many times what exhausts you is not the work or the goal in front of you, but the rigid tension you carry while doing it? It is not that you lack energy, it is that your energy is being used to fight yourself. And when you see this, you begin to understand why relaxation is not a luxury, it is necessary. Many people think they are tired because they lack motivation or are not strong enough. In truth, most exhaustion comes from maintaining too high a level of control for too long. You work and you police yourself. You move forward and you monitor whether you are doing well enough. Energy is used not only for action, but to maintain an image, a standard, a pace. When you must hold too many things at once, you slowly run dry without noticing. In Jung's view, psychic energy is not something you can increase by forcing more. It is directly tied to how internally seamless you are. When you live under constant self-surveillance, a large part of your energy is locked into sustaining tension. This does not create strength, it creates wear, and wear is quiet. It arrives as heaviness in the head, loss of interest, irritability, or simply fatigue with no clear cause. I met an old colleague again, Kelvin, after years without contact. In the past, he was the type everyone assumed was solid. Hard-working, highly disciplined, rarely showing emotion. But up close, you could see he almost never relaxed. After every achievement came a new target. After every step forward came a higher standard. He did not allow himself to slow down, and he did not allow himself to be wrong. Even when things were going well, he held a guarded posture, as if the slightest loosening would make everything collapse. When we met again, I realized the change was not in his job title, but in how he sat, how he spoke, how he looked at the person in front of him. He no longer answered quickly to prove he understood. He listened more. His pace slowed, yet he was not any less sharp. Kelvin said there was a period when he was forced to stop because his body was depleted. Not because he wanted to change, but because he could no longer continue in the old way. During that time, he did not make a new self-optimization plan like before. He did not throw himself into a new training program. The only thing he did was allow himself not to meet the standard every day. At first, this made him very anxious. He feared that without pressure, he would decline. But what happened was different. When he no longer had to maintain the image of always being ready and strong, he had more energy for what truly mattered. His decisions became less rushed, his conversations became less tense, and his work results, strangely, became better. Kelvin's change did not come from doing less. It came from no longer putting himself in a constant state. When you stop forcing yourself to maintain continuous tension, your inner system recalibrates. You do not lose motivation. You only lose the excess pressure layer. And when that layer falls away, what remains is often more essential, more stable. Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." When you focus only on external outcomes, you easily believe you need more effort. But when you look at the inner state that is operating, you may realize you are spending too much energy maintaining an image or avoiding errors. The awakening Jung speaks of is not a dramatic experience. It is simply the ability to see where you are pressuring yourself and the courage to loosen that place. Relaxation, in its deeper meaning, is not leaving life. It is changing how you are present in life. When you no longer have to prove your worth through every action, you work with a clearer focus. When you no longer have to watch every possibility, you can give your attention to what is happening right in front of you. This does not remove challenges, but it stops you from creating extra challenges by fighting yourself. So many people live as if they are gripping something invisible all day. The hand aches not because the object is too heavy, but because it is never released. Relaxation is the moment you open your hand, not to drop what matters, but to stop hurting yourself. When you stop using energy to hold tension, that energy naturally becomes available for creativity, connection, and real presence. What matters here is not learning one specific relaxation technique. What matters is noticing each time you are tightening yourself too much. Just soften a little. Allow yourself not to be perfect for one moment. Small things like this begin to change how energy moves inside you. And when energy is no longer used to pressure yourself, you do not need to force life to flow more smoothly. You only need to stop making it heavier from within. Number 7. Are you attracted to peace or from desperation? And as you begin to see that relaxation helps your inner energy stop sabotaging itself, another question naturally arises in your life, quietly but truthfully. Not what you want, but what state you are in when that wanting is sent out. Because for Jung, you do not attract life through surface words or thoughts. You attract through the underlying psychological state you live with each day. Many people believe they are manifesting through hope. But if you look closely, that hope often comes with a sense of urgency. It does not stand firmly. It needs constant reassurance. It fears disappointment. And when hope has to be held so tightly, what may be operating underneath is not hope, but desperation wearing a positive mask. Jung did not use desperation as melodrama, but as a psychological term, a prolonged lack of safety, where a person feels they need something outside themselves in order to stand steady inside. When you desire from desperation, that desire carries pressure. It is not an opening, it is a rope that pulls. You pull life toward you in fear of loss, fear of lack, fear of being too late. And by pulling like that, you send a very clear message into the unconscious: I am not okay if this does not happen. The unconscious hears that message clearly, and its job is not to give you what you want, it is to protect you from threat. So it responds by keeping you in waiting, tension, and lack. Jung believed the unconscious is always loyal to the baseline state. When the baseline is peace, the unconscious does not need to defend, it allows life to open. When the baseline is desperation, the unconscious contracts and life mirrors that contraction through repeated experiences of shortage. Not because you are unworthy, but because your inner system is operating as if everything is in danger. A story in the Bible illustrates this difference vividly, the moment Peter walks on water. When he steps out of the boat and keeps his gaze on Jesus, he can walk on the waves without sinking. Not because the sea is calm, not because he has special strength, but because inside him is total trust. But the moment Peter looks down at the deep water and feels the strong wind around him, fear rises. He panics, and immediately he sinks. What is striking is that the outer circumstance does not change between those two moments. Only the inner state changes. It is not the sea that makes him sink. It is fear replacing peace. Through a Jungian lens, this is not a story of supernatural magic, but a precise psychological metaphor. When Peter walks in trust, his psychic energy is unified and open. When fear takes control, that energy contracts and betrays him. He does not lose ability. He loses connection to the state that supports him. What changes is not whether he deserves it, but that he leaves peace and falls into desperation. And that shift in state determines whether he stands or sinks. What is subtle is that desperation is rarely recognized accurately. It disguises itself skillfully. It can look like effort, determination, and refusal to give up. But underneath it always carries one repeating question: if I don't have this, what will happen to me? Jung believed that the question is the center of the issue. When desire is built on fear of loss, it stops being a natural desire and becomes a survival mechanism. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." When you see clinginess, lack, or insecurity repeating in your relationships or circumstances, that is not the fault of others or of life. It is a mirror reflecting the state you are living with, not to judge, but to recognize. You can picture attractions like a room receiving sunlight. When the window is open, light enters naturally. When the window is shut tight out of fear of the wind, you can turn on as many lamps as you like. It will not replace real light. Peace is like opening the window. Desperation is like keeping everything sealed and trying to compensate with artificial effort. Life is not persuaded by lamps. It responds to real openness. Peace, in Jung's spirit, is not a state where everything is perfect. It is the capacity to be uncertain without losing yourself. In that state, your desire does not carry coercion. It does not demand immediate results. It does not need to be proven, and therefore it does not create inner resistance. Many people believe they must get what they want first, and only then can they be at peace. Jung saw it the other way around. He believed that only when peace becomes the foundation can what fits enter your life without creating more conflict. Not because you attract better, but because you are no longer broadcasting. Desperation creates frantic movement. It makes you push the process, control outcomes, and continually ask whether you have done enough. Peace creates a different movement, slower but directed. Not passive waiting, but action without self-erosion. Jung believed every lasting transformation requires this state, where consciousness no longer has to fight the unconscious for control. Peace also does not mean denying fear. Jung never advised people to hide emotions. Peace is when fear is seen, acknowledged, but not allowed to drive the whole direction. When fear is no longer at the wheel, the baseline state changes. And when the baseline changes, what you attract changes too. At the deepest level, what is happening is not that you attract correctly or incorrectly, it is that you are living in a particular state as desired. Desire born from peace leads you toward experiences that nourish steadiness. Desire born from desperation leads you into loops that reinforce lack. Life does not punish and does not reward. It responds with precision. And perhaps the most important point of this part is not what you want, but whether you are honest enough to look at the feeling that comes with that wanting. Pause for 1 second and answer sincerely. The last time you looked at what you long for, Did you feel peace or a quiet desperation? If you are brave enough, share your story in the comments, not to be fixed, but to hear yourself speak the truth you have been silent about for so long. Number 8. Why the harder you try, the less you get what you want. The moment you begin to realize that not all efforts bring the same results, a very subtle paradox of the inner life also starts to appear. There are people who are not lacking in hard work, not lacking in discipline, not lacking in willpower. They do a lot, they keep trying, and they even sacrifice more than necessary. Yet the further they go, the more they feel themselves drifting away from what they long for. Not far in the sense of obvious failure, but in a quieter way, they move forward, yet do not feel they are truly touching it. According to Jung, when a person keeps trying harder and still does not get what they want, the problem rarely lies in not trying enough. It lies in the underlying psychological state from which their effort is born. Because effort is never neutral, it always carries an inner quality. Two people can do the same thing, work equally hard, spend the same amount of time, yet end up with completely different results. Not because of ability, but because they are standing in two very different inner positions within themselves when they act. There is a kind of effort that comes from life itself. In this mode, you are still serious, still responsible, but inside, there is a sense of openness. You allow yourself to learn, to experiment, to get things wrong and to adjust. You do not tie your entire self-worth to each small outcome. But there is another kind of effort, more common and harder to detect, an effort that comes from fear. In this mode, you are not really moving towards what you want. You are running away from the feeling of, I am not enough, I am going to fall behind, I am going to be abandoned. When effort is fueled by fear, it carries a very strong hidden message. The present moment is not safe. I must stay tense in order to exist. This message does not only live at the level of thought. It is sent straight into the nervous system and the unconscious. And when the nervous system constantly receives danger signals, the whole body shifts into survival mode. In this mode, the brain does not prioritize creativity, flexibility, or deep connection. It prioritizes control, defense, and the avoidance of mistakes. From a neurological perspective, this is why the more you try, the more rigid you feel. Rising cortisol narrows your focus. You only see what can be controlled, the familiar paths, the safe options. You still act. You may even act a lot, but you no longer have access to the deeper layers of intuition and sense of timing. And it is precisely those layers that generate real shifts in life. Jung saw this phenomenon as a form of prolonged inner conflict. When the ego equates self-worth with results, every effort carries the pressure to prove something. You are no longer doing things because you want to live fully. You are doing them so you will not be seen as a failure. In that state, effort slowly becomes a subtle form of self-erosion. You do not allow yourself to slow down. You do not allow yourself to be wrong. And you do not allow yourself to rest. And it is exactly this refusal that makes psychic energy begin to turn back, to turn against you. I am reminded of a young woman named Carla, who works in the creative communications field. Carla is genuinely talented and takes her work very seriously. For many years, she believed that if she could just try a bit harder, perfect one more skill, the opportunity she was waiting for would arrive. But the further she advanced, the more tension she carried. She worked in a constant state of fear, fear of falling behind, fear of not being good enough, fear of being replaced. The irony was that precisely when she was trying the hardest, her creativity began to retreat. Her ideas became safe, her decisions cautious, and even the smallest piece of feedback was enough to keep her awake at night. From the outside, Carla looked very driven, but on the inside, her nervous system had never been allowed to relax. Jung would not call that a lack of courage or willpower. He would say that Carla's effort is being fed by a state of inner unsafety. And when effort arises from fear, it cannot lead you to what you want. It can only help maintain the very state of fear itself. The unconscious, whose task is to protect, will keep pulling you back, creating loops that force you to try harder in order to prepare, to be sure, to avoid being wrong. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you try to force yourself to be better, stronger, more than enough without touching the fear that is operating underneath, you are not truly moving forward. You are only trying to throw light on a dark area you have not looked at directly. And it is precisely that dark area, while still unconscious, that will continue to control the way you act, making it so that the more you strive outwardly, the more exhausted you become inwardly, as if you were running very fast without ever leaving the same spot. You can imagine this kind of effort as trying to row a boat upstream in a thick fog. You use a lot of strength, water splashes everywhere, your muscles burn with fatigue, but you cannot see the current, not because you are weak, but because you are rowing in conditions that do not allow you to sense the direction. When your vision is obscured by tension, the harder you row, the more likely you are to burn out without getting very far. What Jung emphasizes is not that you should abandon effort, but that you should change the quality of effort. When you feel safe enough inside, effort no longer carries urgency. You still work hard, but you no longer beat yourself up with pressure. You do not need to force yourself to move forward. And precisely when you are no longer forced, your psychic energy stops turning against you. When effort is no longer a tool to prevent collapse, it becomes a flow. You act from presence, not from panic. Energy is no longer drained by defense. It is used for sharpness, for intuition, for the ability to recognize the right moment to advance or to pause. And here, the paradox begins to dissolve. You do not try less, but you achieve more, in a lighter, more precise way that hurts you far less. The practical application of this part does not lie in doing less, but in observing your inner state while you are trying. Whenever you notice yourself pushing, tensing, or blaming yourself for not having achieved something yet, pause for a moment and ask, right now, am I trying in order to open or to prevent a collapse? You do not need a perfect answer. You only need to notice. That noticing in itself already changes the state, because you are no longer completely identified with the tension. And before you continue, this may be the right moment to stop for a bit. Thank you for walking with me through half of this journey. Before we move on, give yourself a small pocket of stillness. No need to think about anything else. No need to draw conclusions. Just breathe more slowly. Feel your body here. Sometimes, it is precisely the moment when you stop trying any harder that energy stops turning against you, and the flow you have been searching for finally has the space to appear. Number 9. When the mind is at ease, the unconscious begins to clear the path. After that long stretch of tension, Carla did not change overnight. There was no sudden moment of illumination, no decisive declaration of, "From now on, I will live differently." The first thing that appeared was simply fatigue deep enough that she could no longer continue as before. Nights of editing drafts past midnight became too much. Mornings opening her email in a defensive stance made her feel heavy rather than determined. And for the first time in many years, she admitted that the way she was operating was no longer sustainable. At first, her slowing down was not a choice. It was a limit. She no longer had the energy to triple-check every detail. She no longer had the strength to think through every possible negative scenario. She began sending drafts earlier. She stopped editing sentences that were already clear enough. She allowed a few ideas to exist, even when she was not entirely sure about them. Inside, she worried that she was slipping from the standards she had once set. She feared the quality would drop, and feared that others would notice the change. But what happened was not what she had imagined. A few projects received more positive feedback than before. One client remarked that her recent ideas felt more natural, less forced. A colleague said she seemed more at ease when presenting. Those comments confused Carla. She was not trying to make herself relaxed. She simply no longer had the strength to hold everything so tightly. The bigger change took place in the way she began her workday. Previously, each new task felt like an exam. She had to prove her ability, meet a standard, and avoid exposing any weak spots. Now, as her inner pressure decreased, she approached her tasks with a different mindset. She was still serious, but no longer felt as if she was standing in front of an invisible judging panel. This did not make her do less, but it did make her less tense. One afternoon, Carla sat in a small cafe near her office. She did not bring her laptop, just a notebook and a pen. There was no pressure to come up with anything. In that quiet space, an idea for an upcoming campaign suddenly appeared. It did not arrive like a dramatic lightning bolt, but like a light connection between two things she had read before. In the past, she might have analyzed it immediately, asking herself whether it was new enough, safe enough. This time, she simply wrote it down without judging it. That idea later became the highlight of the project. Carla began to notice something. When she no longer forced herself to find answers immediately, many answers came more easily. When she stopped rushing to respond, her responses became more accurate. When she stopped trying to impress, her presence became clearer. These changes were not loud. They did not create a sense of victory, but they created a new rhythm, less hurried and more stable. From Jung's perspective, the deeper part of the human being is always quietly arranging experiences, memories, and intuitions into meaningful patterns. This process does not function well when it is forced to deliver results on command. It needs space for what is still unclear to take shape. Carla did not think about this in academic language. She simply felt that when she no longer filled every moment with anxiety, the right thing appeared more distinctly on its own. She began practicing a very small change, not replying to emails as soon as they arrived, unless it was truly necessary. She would read them, leave them, and come back when her mind had softened. She stopped accepting projects just because she was afraid of missing opportunities. She asked herself a simpler question than before. Is this really right for me? That question had once been drowned in a flood of other questions about image and position. Now it was brought to the front. Once, an old collaborator contacted her about a long-term project. In the past, she would have analyzed every risk, asking herself, what if it fails? What if she does not meet expectations? This time, she thought it through carefully, but without panic. She realized she wanted the project out of genuine interest, not fear of falling behind. That decision brought her a sense of inner peace that had rarely accompanied the signing of new contracts before. The biggest difference did not lie in outside opportunities, but in how she experienced herself. Previously, a small mistake could make her blame herself for days. Now, she still learned from her errors, but no longer turned them into proof that she was not good enough. This significantly reduced the harsh inner dialogues that had once consumed most of her energy. Jung once said that a person does not become whole by eliminating darkness, but by becoming conscious of it. For Carla, darkness was not something dramatic. It was the fear of being replaced, judged, and looked down on. When she looked directly at those fears, instead of trying to work more to cover them up, they did not disappear, but they lost their power to control all of her behavior. A calm mind, in Carla's case, did not mean she stopped worrying. It meant worry no longer took up all the space. She still had tired days. She still had projects that did not go smoothly. But instead of immediately speeding up to prove her worth again, she allowed herself to adjust her pace. She did not react right away. She watched first. Gradually, she realized she no longer felt as if she were running in an endless race. She still had goals. She still wanted to grow. But goals were no longer the only measure of her value. This created a very practical change. She could focus on the process instead of obsessing only over the result. The irony is that the opportunity she had longed for over many years did not arrive during the period when she worked the hardest. It came after she had changed her inner rhythm. An invitation to collaborate appeared from an old contact. A new project was born from an idea she had written down during a pressure-free afternoon. From the outside, people might call that luck. But for Carla, it was the result of no longer interfering with herself. Perhaps the hardest thing to accept is that many turning points do not happen when we try the hardest, but when we are calm enough not to further complicate what is already trying to form. When the mind becomes less noisy, you do not need to pull the future towards you. You only need to be present enough to recognize the right steps that are already in front of you. Carla did not become a completely different person. She was still ambitious and still wanted to do her job well. But that ambition was no longer driven by the fear of being left behind. And it was precisely this subtle shift that made her actions lighter, more precise, and more sustainable. When she stopped striving in the old way, the right things no longer had to be hunted down in panic. They slowly emerged within a rhythm of life she finally allowed herself to walk with. Number 10. Manifestation happens when there is no more conflict within you. Since her inner rhythm began to slow down, a very subtle truth gradually came into view, quiet but impossible to ignore. It was not that the outer world suddenly changed, but that you stopped splitting yourself into parts that were pulling in opposite directions. And precisely in this ending of inner division, the things you once tried to call in through effort began to have the space to come on their own. Many people think manifestation is about attracting something from the outside, but Jung viewed this process in a completely different way. He believed that what truly matters is not how much you want something, but whether you are internally aligned. When consciousness longs for something, but the unconscious is on guard, psychic energy becomes fragmented. And when energy is fragmented, there is no single flow strong enough to complete its movement. In everyday life, this conflict shows up in very ordinary ways. You say you want to change your job, but your body feels exhausted every time you think about stepping out of the familiar. You say you want a deep relationship, but you feel tense when someone comes too close. You say you want freedom, but you panic when you no longer have control. These conflicts are not flaws. They simply show that there are many parts inside you with different needs that have not yet sat down together. According to Jung, the unconscious is not opposing your desires. It is simply loyal to the sense of safety it has learned. When a conscious desire touches an area of the unconscious that has not been healed, the unconscious will react. Not by outright forbidding, but by creating very subtle counterforces, procrastination, doubt, exhaustion, or coincidences that keep things from flowing smoothly. Manifestation is not blocked because you lack ability, but because inside you there is not yet the necessary consensus to receive what you are asking for. Jung saw the human being as a system of psychic energy. When that energy is being pulled in many opposing directions, it cannot create clear movement. This is like an electric current that is leaking because the circuit has not closed. The source is not weak. The structure simply does not yet allow the current to complete its path. When you are still conflicted inside, every effort is consumed by the battle against yourself. There is a truth that is very hard to accept, but deeply liberating. Many of the things you do not yet have are not missing because you have not tried hard enough, but because some part of you does not yet want to live with their consequences. Success brings visibility. Love brings the possibility of loss. Freedom brings responsibility. When these consequences are still seen as dangerous by a part of you, the unconscious will not open the door, no matter how much the conscious mind desires it. Jung once said a very short sentence that cuts straight into this territory. Where your fear is, there is your task. Fear is not a sign that you are on the wrong path. It is a sign that you are standing at a threshold that needs to be reconciled. When you try to push through fear by force, the conflict intensifies. When you turn back to look at fear with attentive listening, the conflict begins to soften. Manifestation, therefore, is not about making something happen, but about creating the conditions in which it is no longer blocked from within. When the parts of you stop pulling against each other, energy is no longer lost. And when energy is not leaking, movement becomes natural. No pushing, no dragging. Everything begins to follow a very human rhythm. You can see this very clearly in small changes in daily life, not only in big turning points. A viewer of the channel once left a very short comment that captured the essence of this process. They wrote, "I did nothing special. I just stopped convincing myself that I had to become another version of me before I was allowed to have what I wanted." There is no technique in that sentence. But there is a very Jungian truth. When you no longer force yourself to become someone else, the resistance inside you subsides. Inner resistance is usually not loud. It does not appear as a clear no. It appears as fatigue, hesitation, lack of motivation, or a sense that this is not the right time. Many people misunderstand these signals as a lack of discipline. But from a Jungian perspective, they are signs of an unresolved conflict, not of weakness. You can imagine this state as trying to walk while your 2 feet are pointing in different directions. The more force you use, the more pain you feel. Not because you do not know how to walk, but because your inner direction is not unified. When both feet turn towards the same direction, you do not need as much strength. Walking becomes natural by itself. Jung never advised people to eliminate the negative parts of themselves. He believed that doing so only creates more division. Instead, he spoke of inner compassion. When the fearful, doubting, defensive parts of you are acknowledged, they no longer need to sabotage things. And when they no longer sabotage, psychic energy stops turning back on itself. Manifestation, in this sense, is not a reward for effort, but a consequence of harmony. When you are no longer dragging yourself towards what you want, and no longer running away from what you fear, you step into a very different state. You are no longer at war. And when there is no war, the flow finds a path. The important thing is that this process does not happen with the flip of a switch. It unfolds through very small changes in how you live each day. How do you listen to your body when it is tired? How do you not force yourself to be fine when you are not? How do you allow a desire to exist without immediately turning it into pressure? These small things are exactly where conflict begins to loosen. And as inner conflict calms, a very familiar phenomenon that is often called by the wrong name begins to appear. Everything seems to become more timely. Not because you control things better, but because you no longer disturb your own rhythm. You meet the right person when you no longer need to prove yourself. You notice opportunities when you are no longer paralyzed by the fear of being wrong. You move when you no longer have to drag yourself. This part is not meant to conclude that from here on, everything will always flow smoothly. Jung never believed in a fixed ideal state. He believed in the continuous movement between consciousness and the unconscious. But he also pointed out something very clear. When you are no longer torn apart inside, life does not need to be convinced. And it is precisely from this inner unity that the next stage of the journey truly opens. Not to get more, but to look more deeply into the patterns that have made you split yourself in the past. Because when conflict is recognized at this level, it always leads to an even deeper question. Which parts of you once had to learn to fight each other in order to survive? And is it now possible for them to live differently? Number 11. Trying to control the outcome is the fastest way to lose it. When you have gone far enough to realize that not everything needs to be forced, many people run into another familiar reflex, more ordinary yet harder to detect: the need to be certain of what will happen. It is not because they are overly ambitious, it is because they have invested too much to be able to calmly accept uncertainty. From here, a subtle loop starts to form. You no longer push yourself the way you used to, but you begin to push the outcome. And it is precisely this small shift that makes the flow get blocked once again. Trying to control the outcome rarely appears as obvious tension. It shows up in very ordinary moments. You finish a task, but cannot relax until you know what others think. You start something new, and constantly ask yourself whether you are on the right track. You wait for a sign, an answer, a confirmation, and in that waiting, your mind is not truly anywhere. You are no longer in what you are doing, but you have also not arrived at where you want to be. According to Jung, this is the state in which the ego tries to retain control in the face of uncertainty. When the outcome becomes the place where you put your sense of safety, you no longer allow the process to unfold by itself. You start living as if the present is only a stepping stone, not valuable in itself, unless it leads to what you desire. And when the present is devalued, the unconscious has no reason to open the way, because it only operates fully when a person is truly present. In literature, many tragedies are built around exactly this mechanism. A clear example is the novel The Great Gatsby. Gatsby is not lacking resolve, not lacking vision, and not lacking the ability to shape circumstances. What makes him lose everything is not a lack of effort, but his desire to cling to a predefined outcome. He does not allow the past to change, does not allow the present to have its own voice. Love, for him, becomes an objective that must be recreated exactly, not a living relationship that is changing and evolving. And it is precisely this fixation that makes everything around him fragile. Jung would not read this story as a moral lesson, but as a psychological symbol. When people try to control the outcome, they are trying to freeze the flow of life in order to avoid being hurt. But life does not move according to rigid patterns. It requires movement. And when it is held back, it does not become safer. It becomes more brittle. From a neuroscientific perspective, the need for control activates brain regions related to prediction and warning. You continuously imagine scenarios, prepare for negative possibilities, and the unconscious sends the signal that the present is not safe enough. The nervous system, therefore, maintains a mild but prolonged state of tension. In this state, you still function normally, still get your work done, but inside, there is always a part of you that is on watch. You never truly rest, even when you are doing nothing. This explains why many people feel exhausted without knowing why. It is not because they are doing too much, it is because they never truly let go. Their mind is always one step ahead, always waiting to see what will happen next. And when you live that way for too long, the feeling of living fully gradually disappears. Everything turns into a sequence of tasks to complete, instead of experiences to be lived. Jung believes that this is the point at which the ego has gone too far beyond its role. The ego is necessary in order to act, to choose, to take responsibility. But when it wants to control the outcome as well, it is taking on a job that does not belong to it. And at that point, it begins to do the opposite of what it intends. Instead of protecting, it depletes. Jung once said, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." Life does not operate by formula. What once brought you safety in one phase can become pressure in another. When you try to hold on to a fixed outcome, you are forcing life to move in a shape you are familiar with, instead of the shape it needs in order to keep evolving. In everyday life, this mechanism appears in very small places. The more you crave a response, the harder it is to focus on what you are doing. The more you need a relationship to be clear, the more restless you feel in its natural pauses. It is not that your desire is wrong, it is that you are trying to force a living process to follow your inner timetable. There are moments when you have done enough. Not enough according to some perfect standard, but enough according to your real capacity at that point in time. Yet because you do not see the outcome, you do not allow yourself to stop. You keep thinking, keep worrying, keep preparing for scenarios that have not happened. And it is precisely this refusal to let yourself rest that gradually pulls you away from life. Many people only realize this when they are so tired that they can no longer control anything. They let go not because they have understood, but because they have no strength left. And strangely, it is exactly in such periods that some things start to move. Not explosively, not miraculously, but right on time. Not because they did more, but because they stopped standing in the way of the process. You may have experienced this yourself. When you stopped waiting for an answer, the answer came on its own in another form. When you stopped trying to hold on to a relationship, and that relationship either became lighter or ended on its own in a clear way. When you stopped forcing yourself to know the future in advance, the path ahead gradually appeared through very small steps. Letting go of control does not mean giving up. It simply means you are no longer using all your energy to fight uncertainty. You still do your part, but you no longer make the outcome a condition for your peace of mind. And it is precisely then that the present becomes a place worth living in again, not just a place to wait. Perhaps the gentlest thing you can do, if you realize you are holding on too tightly, is to loosen just a little. Not to let go of everything, just a bit looser than yesterday. Allow yourself to work without constantly checking. Allow a relationship to breathe. Allow the future a little extra space to form itself. If, while listening, someone comes to mind who is also silently exhausted from holding too many things inside at once, then sharing this video might be a very gentle gesture, one that needs no explanation or advice. Simply a way to let them know that this feeling is not theirs alone, that there are others also fumbling their way through learning how to soften, how to let go at the right moment without losing themselves. Number 12. Relaxing in the right way helps you act more accurately. Once you have stopped gripping the outcome and no longer pour your entire life force into making everything unfold exactly as planned, you will begin to notice something very subtle. The problem has never really been about whether you do too little or too much. It has always been about your inner state when you act. And at this very point, the true meaning of relaxation slowly reveals itself. Not as a final rest at the end, but as a quiet foundation that helps every choice and every step become more precise. Many people believe that accurate action comes from clearer thinking, more careful calculation, or more thorough preparation. But Jung looks at the issue from another level. He believes that when people live in prolonged tension, their clarity is distorted. You can think a lot, but what you come up with often arises from fear, from the need for self-protection, from parts of yourself that have not been faced. And in that case, even if your actions seem reasonable, they still carry a subtle deviation. That deviation does not cause immediate consequences, but it accumulates over time. Relaxing in the right way does not make you lose alertness. It reveals what has been hidden under tension. When the body and mind are no longer in survival mode, you begin to notice signals you previously ignored. Not signals from the outside, but from within. The feeling of lightness or heaviness when you stand before a decision, the contraction or opening in your body when you think about a choice. Jung sees these signals as the language of the unconscious. And only when you are quiet enough does that language become audible. In real life, many people act wrongly, not because they lack intelligence, but because they are acting from a part of themselves that is constantly being driven. When you are used to having to be fast, to be strong, to prove yourself, you very easily confuse decisiveness with reaction. You think you are choosing, but in fact, you are running. And when you are running, it is very hard to see where you are running to. I once listened to a woman share in a workshop on depth psychology. She had spent many years working in a high-pressure environment, used to making quick decisions and being responsible for many people. On the outside, she was the image of stability. But when she spoke about her inner life, she said she often felt confused, as if she was always one step ahead of herself. She acted a lot, but rarely felt right. During her work with Jungian psychology, she began learning to pause before making a decision, not to think more, but to feel. At first, this made her extremely uncomfortable. She was used to using her intellect to override every feeling. But when she allowed herself to stay with those uncomfortable sensations without rushing to fix them, something very different happened. She realized that many of her previous decisions came from a deep fear. Fear of losing control, fear of disappointing others, fear of being seen as weak. Once those fears were seen, they no longer had to control her actions. She did not become slower in a lethargic way. She became more selective. She did not do less because she was burnt out. She did less because she no longer needed to prove herself. And in that state, she began to act more accurately. Not always right at once, but with fewer mistakes to correct, fewer turns to go back on. Jung believes that precision in action does not come from eliminating mistakes, but from not letting unseen unconscious parts steer you. When those parts are still being pushed down, they will find their way into behavior, usually in the form of haste, excessiveness, or repetition of familiar choices. Relaxing in the right way does not make those parts disappear. It creates enough safety for them to show themselves, and once they have surfaced, they no longer need to intrude into your actions. You can picture this as rowing a boat on a river. When you are tense, you use all your strength to row, constantly correcting the direction for fear of drifting off course. But because you are so tense, you cannot feel the current beneath you. When you loosen just enough, your arms do not become weaker, they become more sensitive. You can feel where the water is pushing, where it is resisting, and you adjust in very small ways. Relaxing in the right way in your psychological life works the same. It does not take away your strength, it refines it. Jung once wrote a sentence that goes straight to the essence of inner accuracy. We cannot change anything until we accept it. As long as you are acting to fight what is, every choice carries a deviation. Only when your inner state is accepted does action stop being pulled by reflex and invisible fear. In daily life, this difference shows itself very clearly. When you relax in the right way, you no longer feel the need to respond immediately. You allow yourself a very small pause before answering, before agreeing, before saying no. That pause is not indecision, it is where clarity appears. You do not need a long analysis. You simply feel whether this choice makes you open or close. Many people fear that if they do not react quickly, opportunities will pass them by. But Jung believes that true opportunities rarely arrive in a state of internal compulsion. The right opportunities tend to appear when you are quiet enough to recognize them. When you are too tense, you may grab many things, but you cannot be sure that they are meant for you. Relaxing in the right way also helps you see when no action is needed. This is especially difficult for those who are used to living through effort, but doing more is not always better. There are situations in which acting at that moment only creates more chaos. When you are calm enough not to interfere, the process self-corrects in a way that is far more effective. The practical application of this part does not lie in relaxing more, but in resetting your relationship with action. Before a decision, give yourself a few seconds to feel your body. You do not need the right answer. You only need to notice your state. Are you wanting to do this because you see clearly, or because you cannot bear a certain feeling? If this question is repeated enough times, it will gradually change the quality of your choices. You can also practice by slowing down familiar moments, walking a little more slowly as you move from one task to another, breathing a little more deeply before responding to a tense situation, giving yourself one extra beat before making a decision. These very small things send a powerful signal to your nervous system that you do not have to live in constant reaction. When you live this way long enough, you will notice something very different. You do not have to search for accuracy. It appears on its own because you are no longer interfering with yourself. Your actions become fewer, but they land better. Not because you have tighter control, but because you are no longer being pulled around by unseen parts. This section does not end with a grand conclusion. It opens up another way of living, in which relaxation does not oppose action. It makes action more fitting. And when you begin to act from that place, a new question emerges. What inner patterns have made you live so tense from such an early time? And how can you come to a place where you no longer have to brace yourself just to be who you are? That is where the journey will continue to go even deeper. Number 13. When you stop clinging, life begins to respond. And when you have passed through enough layers of tension, enough forced efforts, enough attempts to control things so you do not lose what you want, a very different movement begins to take shape. It is not loud, not dramatic, and can easily be overlooked. It is the moment you stop clinging, not because you no longer care, but because you no longer live in a state where you must grip everything tightly in order to feel safe. It is precisely at this point that life begins to respond in a very different way. Clinging, in Jungian language, is not simply attachment. It is a psychological state in which the ego equates its own existence with the outcome. When you cling, what you are saying to the unconscious is, if this does not happen, I will collapse. And the unconscious, loyal to its protective function, will do everything it can to keep you from stepping into that zone of uncertainty. Not because it is against your desire, but because it is trying to keep you safe in the only way it knows how. Carl Jung often emphasized that people do not suffer because they lack ability, but because they are bound by unconscious identifications that have not been brought into awareness. When you cling to an outcome, a relationship, or an image of the future, you are placing your entire nervous system into a state of alert. And in that state, no matter how right your actions are, your energy still leaks away through the fear of loss. I once saw this very clearly in the story of a married couple I know. Brian was a college friend of mine. He was responsible, serious, and always tried to do the right thing. When he got married, Brian carried that same attitude into the relationship. He believed that as long as he cared enough, tried enough, and sacrificed enough, the marriage would be stable and lasting. But the more he tried to keep everything under control, the heavier the atmosphere between them became. Brian clung to the idea that if he relaxed his grip, everything would fall into chaos. So he controlled in very subtle ways. He controlled time. He controlled communication. He controlled which emotions should and should not appear in the family. On the outside, he looked like a responsible husband, but inside, the relationship was slowly losing its life. His wife did not feel met. She felt held too tightly. From Jung's perspective, this is the point at which clinging has become a form of defense. Brian no longer maintained the relationship out of love, but out of fear of losing it. And the unconscious of both people felt this difference very clearly. When a relationship is held together by fear, it no longer has space to grow on its own. It becomes fragile, even if on the surface it appears stable. Change did not come when Brian tried harder. It came when he became exhausted from having to keep everything right. During a period of crisis, he was forced to face an uncomfortable truth. He could not control another person's emotions, choices, or life force. When he stopped clinging to the image of a proper relationship, the atmosphere began to soften. Not because all the problems disappeared, but because for the first time, the relationship was no longer being squeezed. Jung sees this moment as a shift in energy. When you stop clinging, the energy you once used to hold tight is given back to life. And life, when it is free, tends to find its own balance. Not in the way you predicted, but in a way that fits the whole system. The state of clinging can be compared to trying to hold a handful of sand in your palm. The tighter you squeeze, the more the sand slips through your fingers. Not because the sand is against you, but because its nature is not something that can be held by force. When you open your hand, the sand lies still, not because you control it better, but because you have stopped acting against its nature. Life is the same. When you cling, you are trying to hold on to something that was not designed to be held. In many cases, people misunderstand stopping clinging as giving up, but Jung draws a very clear distinction between these two states. Giving up is withdrawing into despair. Stopping clinging is staying, but without taking over. You are still present, still caring, still acting, but you no longer stake your own existence on the outcome. It is this subtle difference that creates a huge shift in the way life responds to you. Carl Jung once wrote, "Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling." As long as you are clinging, there is constant conflict inside. One part wants to hold tight in order to be safe. Another part wants to move forward in order to live. It is this inner conflict that causes energy to leak away. And only when you stop clinging to the outcome and listen to both sides within you, does action return to its right rhythm without needing to be forced. What surprises many people is that when they stop clinging, life does not collapse the way they imagined. On the contrary, many things begin to self-correct. Relationships become more authentic. Work becomes less tense, yet more effective. The right opportunities appear, not because you pull them in, but because you are no longer blocking the way with your fear. From a Jungian perspective, when you stop clinging, you are sending a very clear signal to the unconscious. I am safe enough that I do not need to control everything. And when the unconscious receives this signal of safety, it no longer needs to erect defense mechanisms. The energy that was once consumed by holding on is freed up for flexibility, intuition, and the capacity to respond in the right moment. In daily life, you can recognize the state of clinging through very small signs. You constantly check for responses, you cannot stop thinking about the outcome, and you find it hard to breathe when things are not yet clear. Stopping clinging does not mean forcing yourself to stop thinking. It means recognizing that you are trying to hold on to something in order to avoid a certain feeling. And when you allow that feeling to exist, without needing to fix it right away, the grip naturally loosens. Life begins to respond, not because you are doing the technique correctly, but because you are no longer sending out the signal of lack. When you are not clinging, you are no longer telling life, "You must be like this for me to be okay." You begin to live from a place of greater inner sufficiency. And from that place, what comes to you usually has a different quality, less dramatic, but more enduring. The practice for this part is not complicated, and it is not meant to be forced. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, all you need to do is notice what you are clinging to at the very start of the day. There is no need to change it right away. Just notice. During the day, whenever you feel yourself becoming impatient about an outcome, gently remind yourself, "I am still here, even while this is not yet clear." Not to convince yourself, but to create a little inner space. When you repeat this often enough, something very different begins to happen. You do not have to try to make life respond. You will see that life has always been responding. It is just that before, you were too busy holding on to notice. And from here, the journey continues even deeper, into recognizing the clinging patterns that were formed very early. The places where you once learned to hold tight in order to be fitting, to be easy to accept. The more it feels like life does not truly open up to you. After passing through the state of no longer clinging, this question is no longer a general philosophical idea. It becomes a very concrete experience. Things only seem to start shifting when you stop trying to become a version that is easy for others to live with and begin to live more honestly with yourself. According to Jung, people do not attract through conscious intention, nor through the image they try to construct. People attract through the degree to which they are living in alignment with their inner structure. When you live out of sync with who you truly are, a large amount of psychological energy is spent maintaining that misalignment, controlling emotions, editing behavior, hiding the parts that are not accepted. When you live closer to yourself, that energy is no longer scattered. And it is precisely this inner coherence that creates a natural magnetism without needing to be named. Jung calls this process individuation, the process of becoming an individual. But this is not a journey of trying to become outstanding or different at any cost. It is the journey of ending the split life, one part to be accepted, another part hidden away. When the rejected parts are acknowledged and integrated, a person no longer has to strain just to exist. And when the strain is gone, their presence becomes clearer. Not clearer in the sense of showing off, but clearer in the sense of consistency. Jung once said a very succinct sentence that forms a foundation for this entire process. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The privilege of a lifetime is not how many things you achieve, but that you become yourself. This is not a soft motivational line. It implies that most of human suffering comes from living too long in images that do not belong to us, just to be safe, to be recognized, or to be loved. Many people believe they need to be better before life will respond. But in Jung's view, the problem rarely lies in you not being enough. It usually lies in the fact that you have been away from yourself for too long. When you live against your own nature, the unconscious must continually send signals to pull you back: fatigue, boredom, crises of meaning, an emptiness that persists even as you are moving forward. These signals are not malfunctions, they are the self-regulating reactions of the psyche. In creative life, there is a very real story that illustrates this clearly. The journey of Haruki Murakami. Before becoming one of the most widely read contemporary writers in the world, Murakami did not follow the proper literary path at all. He once ran a small jazz bar, living quite separately from Japan's academic and literary mainstream. Writing came to him not from an ambition to become a writer, but from a very ordinary moment, when he was sitting in the stands at a baseball game and suddenly felt very clearly that he could write. What matters is not that moment, but how Murakami continued afterwards. He did not try to write according to what was expected. He did not adjust his voice to fit tradition. He removed elements that were seen as out of place. He wrote with jazz, with Western culture, with solitude, with unexplained gaps. At first he was sharply criticized for being unlike anyone, but it was precisely this refusal to force himself to resemble others that created a voice that could not be blended. From a Jungian perspective, Murakami did not attract success through strategy, but by allowing his unique self to express itself fully. Here, what Jung wants to emphasize is not be different, but stop betraying yourself. Murakami did not sit down and decide to become original. He simply did not abandon his own inner rhythm. And it is that fidelity which creates magnetism. Not the magnetism of an image, but the magnetism of truth. If we use a comparison to describe this process, it is like a clock finally being set to its own inner rhythm. When a clock runs according to an external rhythm, it still runs, but it is always off time. When it is adjusted to its own mechanism, it does not need to run faster. It only needs to run correctly. People are the same. When you live according to someone else's rhythm, you can be very busy and yet always feel off. When you live according to your own rhythm, you do not need to push, but life gradually begins to feel on time. According to Jung, when you become yourself, the unconscious no longer has to create conflicts to pull you back. Many of life's difficulties are not failures, but signals that you are living out of alignment. When that misalignment is corrected, not by force, but by honesty, many natural resistances ease. Not because life has become easy, but because you are no longer splitting yourself. This explains why, when you live true to yourself, you no longer attract everything. Some relationships will leave. Some opportunities will no longer appear. But what comes will not require you to play a role. They will not demand that you sacrifice what is essential in exchange for acceptance. You no longer need to manifest in the sense of dragging life toward you. You simply stop pushing yourself out of the flow through your own lack of honesty. On a very ordinary level, You can notice this through simple signs. When you do something that is right for you, even if it is hard, you still have energy. When you are in a relationship that is right for you, you do not have to tense up to keep it going. When you walk a path that suits you, you do not need to constantly convince yourself you are on the right track. These signs are not loud, but they are very consistent. The lesson of this part does not lie in finding your true self all at once. That rarely happens in a single moment. It lies in being honest enough to recognize when you are not living truthfully. Each time you refuse a role that no longer fits, each time you allow yourself to listen to your real feeling instead of your habitual reflex, you move closer to yourself. According to Jung, when you become yourself, you do not need to attract. You become a natural point of resonance. Life is not pulled toward you by effort. It finds you through compatibility. And it is here that what many people call manifesting is no longer a goal to achieve, but a natural consequence of living in accordance with who you really are. You can pause here for a moment, not to think more, but to listen for what within you is quietly nodding along to these lines. And if there is a part of you that feels seen, leave the words, "Be yourself," in the comments. Not as a slogan, but as a soft reminder to yourself that this journey is not about becoming someone else, but about returning to the person you have always been. Number 15. Relaxation is when your life begins to flow in the right direction. By the time you have gradually recognized the layers of tension, control, clinging, and the silent inner conflicts, the final part of this journey is no longer about explaining yet another principle. It comes down to a very human question. So then, what does relaxing in the right way actually look like in everyday life? Not in theory, not in ideal moments, but right in the familiar rhythm of living, in work, in relationships, and in very real worries. According to Jung, relaxation is not a state separate from life. It is the way you are in life, without splitting yourself into two sides. When you are tense, one part of you is doing, the other part is supervising, judging, pushing, or fearing. Your energy is therefore divided. Relaxing is the right way means you stop standing opposite yourself as an opponent to control, and start standing on the same side as the experience that is unfolding. One metaphor that can make this clearer is driving at night. When you are too tense, you grip the steering wheel tightly, your eyes are wide open, and your body is rigid. You believe that gripping harder will make you safer, but in reality, that stiffness slows your reflexes. By contrast, when you loosen just enough, still focused but not clenched, you feel the road better and respond more flexibly. Relaxation in life works in a similar way. It does not make you lose control. It helps you adjust more accurately. From a Jungian perspective, many mistimed actions do not come from ignorance, but from acting while your inner state is contracted. When you are afraid of being wrong, afraid of losing, afraid of not being enough, your actions are often defensive. You choose safety instead of suitability. You react instead of responding. And although everything may look reasonable on the surface, you still feel off inside. I once heard a woman share in a workshop on depth psychology. She said that for many years, she always felt that she was doing the right thing, but it didn't feel right. She went to work regularly, fulfilled her responsibilities, and maintained a stable image. But every decision was accompanied by fatigue. She always needed certainty before doing anything, and that certainty was never enough. She said she did not lack competence, but always felt as if she were pushing a heavy object uphill. Only when she began working with her bodily and emotional state, rather than with goals, did everything start to change. She did not immediately quit her job or dramatically alter her life. The first change was the way she began an action. Instead of asking, "Is this the right thing to do?" she learned to notice where in her body she was tense. Were her shoulders tight? Was her breath shallow? Was her chest constricted? And just by softening those spots before continuing, her actions became completely different. She said she did not do less, but each thing she did cost her less. Jung often emphasized that the unconscious does not communicate in words, but in sensations and images. When you ignore the signals of your body and emotions, you are ignoring the unconscious's main channel of communication. Relaxing in the right way is not about trying to think positively. It is about creating the conditions for that channel to open. When the body is no longer in alarm mode, the unconscious finally has space to adjust your behavior in ways that fit the whole of who you are. In practice, this can be cultivated in very concrete and simple ways. For example, before you start something important, instead of diving straight in, take a few dozen seconds to check your inner state. Do not analyze, do not judge, just register it. If you feel tense, do not try to chase it away. Allow it to be there while you slow your breathing slightly and soften the places that are clenched. When the body receives a signal of safety, the mind naturally quiets down. While you are working, if you notice that you are rushing, feeling impatient, or thinking too much about the outcome, this is not a sign that you need to push harder. It is a sign that you need to return to your state. Pause for a moment, change your posture, look into the distance. Give your nervous system a chance to step out of survival mode. Then continue, but from a different place inside. You will see that the same action has a completely different quality. Another important point about relaxing in the right way is not using it as a tool to get results faster. If you relax with the aim, so that everything will go my way, you have returned to the old control loop. Relaxation is not a strategy. It is a baseline condition. Only when you stop treating it as a means to an end does it reveal its real power. Jung has a sentence that fits perfectly here. The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. When the mind is pulled too tight, you easily fall into two extremes, either forcing yourself to be right or feeling that everything is meaningless. Relaxation slows that pendulum, so you are not thrown from one extreme to the other. In that in-between space, your actions become more flexible and alive. The same is true in relationships. Before a difficult conversation, instead of preparing perfect words, check what fear you are carrying. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing connection. When you recognize and allow that feeling to be present, your voice naturally changes. You speak more slowly, you listen better, and you respond with less defensiveness. The outcome will not always match your wish, but you no longer feel that you have betrayed yourself. In this final section, the practical application does not lie in adding another habit, but in changing the starting point of every action. From now on, before you do anything, ask, "What is my state right now?" Not to judge, but to adjust. If you are tense, soften before continuing. If you are tired, slow down before deciding. You do not need to change your plan. You only need to change where you are standing when you carry out that plan. Relaxing in the right way also does not mean you will always feel comfortable. Sometimes, not fighting your emotions makes you feel them more clearly. But the difference is this: you are no longer being driven by them from behind. You are with them, and so your actions are no longer purely reactive. The end of this journey does not close with a promise that everything will be smooth. It closes with a different orientation of living from the state rather than from pressure. When you can do that, life does not need to be forced to flow. It finds its own way, in your own rhythm. After everything, perhaps the most important question is not how hard you have tried, but how much you have allowed yourself to become lighter. Jung does not promise that relaxation will bring everything to you immediately. He points to a deeper truth. When you are no longer torn apart inside by fear and control, life does not need to be pushed. It finds its own timing. Relaxation, in the Jungian spirit, is not stepping back from life, but stepping into life without fighting yourself. When you stop treating yourself as a project that must be fixed, the unconscious no longer needs to pull the brake. When you no longer cling to the outcome, your actions become more accurate, your relationships less burdened, and what you are seeking begins to appear in a more natural, fitting way. You may realize that what you have always been looking for is not something outside, but the feeling of being at rest within your own being. And when that feeling is present, many other things naturally shift. Not because you are doing everything right, but because you are no longer blocking the flow that has always been there. If these reflections make you pause, think, or fall into a quiet moment that feels very personal, then perhaps this journey is touching you in its own way. Liking the video and subscribing to the channel is not just a form of support. It is a gentle promise that we will continue to go deeper together into the subtle layers of the psyche, where the unconscious operates, where old patterns are revisited, and where each of us slowly learns how to return to living more fully as ourselves.